My name is Zara, and I've always been known as the lazy girl in my village. I lived in a small, cosy cottage with my father on the outskirts of town. The village was peaceful, surrounded by fields and green hills. Our home wasn't anything fancy, but it was enough for the two of us. My father worked tirelessly every day, tending to the fields and looking after the crops. But me? Well, I wasn't much for hard work. I helped my father in the fields, but I always found ways to avoid doing too much. My job was to chase away the birds that came to peck at the rice crops, but instead of standing up and waving a stick like the other farmers, I built a system of wooden poles tied together with ropes. These poles would scare the birds away automatically, allowing me to lay back and relax under the shade of a tree. I thought it was genius, no sweat, no effort. My father would often shake his head and say, "Zara, one day you'll regret not working harder. What if something happens to me? How will you take care of everything?" But I didn't take him seriously. Life was good, and I didn't need to worry. I had my routines, and they worked just fine. But deep down, I knew my father was getting older, and his health wasn't as strong as it used to be. Still, I didn't want to think about it too much. I loved my carefree days. After all, who wanted to work harder when you could make life easier, right? Little did I know, everything was about to change. It was a hot summer day when it all started. One hot summer morning, everything changed. My father had been complaining about feeling weak for weeks, but I thought it was just the heat getting to him. He worked from dawn until dusk in the fields, as usual, but his energy was draining faster than I realized. One day he collapsed right there in the middle of the rice field. I rushed to his side, my heart racing, but he could barely sit up. "I'm not feeling well, Zara," he whispered, his face pale and covered in sweat. "You'll have to take care of things for a while." I didn't know what to do. He had always been the one to handle everything. I had only ever done the easy jobs, chasing birds and sitting in the shade. Now the thought of managing the entire farm by myself seemed impossible. Days passed, and my father's condition worsened. He could barely move, and I had to help him back to the house whenever he tried to go outside. The crops started to suffer. I watered them as best I could, but it wasn't enough. The soil was dry and the weather was unforgiving. The rice plants began to wilt, their once green leaves turning yellow and brittle. I knew I couldn't save the crops alone. The village seemed to notice too. People whispered as they passed by our cottage, their eyes filled with pity. They didn't believe I could handle the responsibility. "Poor Zara," they said. "Her father's sick, and she's too lazy to manage things on her own." That night I sat outside, staring up at the sky, feeling more helpless than I had ever felt before. Why didn't I take my father seriously when he warned me, I thought. Now, it might be too late to save everything. I was frustrated and scared. What if we lost everything? What if I couldn't help him? The next morning I woke up early, my head still heavy with worry. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft orange glow over the village. I went outside, hoping for some clarity, but all I saw was a field full of wilted crops and a father who couldn't get out of bed. I felt like everything was slipping through my fingers. As I sat by the door, lost in my thoughts, I heard voices coming from the village square. Curiosity pulled me toward the noise. I grabbed my shawl and made my way down the dirt road, trying to shake off the weight in my chest. When I reached the square, I saw a group of villagers gathered around a soldier in shiny armor. He was holding a scroll, and his voice rang out clearly, announcing something that caught my attention. "A great competition is being held at the king's palace. The winner will receive a chest of gold," the soldier declared. The crowd murmured with excitement. The contest is open to anyone, no matter their background. The only requirement is courage and skill. I stood there, feeling the spark of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. My heart began to race as I thought about it. Could this be my chance to change everything? If I won, I could buy enough food and medicine for my father, and maybe even hire help to save the crops. Without even thinking, I pushed my way through the crowd and stepped forward. "I'll join the competition," I said, surprising even myself with how confident I sounded. The villagers turned to look at me, and I could see the disbelief in their eyes. "Zara," someone whispered, "she's too lazy to even care for her own field." But I didn't care about their doubts. This was my moment. I was determined to prove them wrong. If I wanted to save my father, my farm, and my future, I had to try. And I had only 3 days to get to the palace. I didn't waste a second. I turned and hurried back home to pack. My journey had just begun. 3 days later, I stood at the edge of a vast lake, watching as hundreds of other contestants lined up around me. The king's palace gleamed in the distance, surrounded by tall golden towers. The air smelled of excitement and anticipation, but I couldn't shake the nervousness gnawing at me. There were strong, fit men and women everywhere, people who looked like they'd been training for this moment their whole lives. I felt like an imposter among them. But I couldn't back out now. I was here, and I had come this far. I had to keep going. The loud voice of the royal announcer snapped me back to attention. "The first challenge is to cross the lake," he boomed. "The first 3 contestants to reach the other side will move on to the next round. You may swim, but the lake is wide and the currents are strong." My stomach tightened. Swim! I couldn't swim like these people. Most of the contestants dove in without hesitation, their muscles propelling them through the water with ease. I stood frozen at the edge, watching them get farther and farther from the shore. Panic crept in. But then I remembered something. I wasn't the strongest or the fastest, but I had something they didn't, my ability to think on my feet. I turned around and ran toward the nearby forest. I gathered some broken branches and thick vines, thinking quickly. I wasn't here to race them in swimming. I was here to outsmart them. I made a raft. It wasn't much, but it would do. I tied the branches together, found a large, flat piece of wood to use as a paddle, and set it in the water. As I paddled across the lake, slowly but surely, I watched as the others struggled with the current. They were tiring out fast. I pushed forward, moving steadily, keeping my focus. When I finally reached the other side, breathless but triumphant, I realized something. I had made it. I was in the top 3. For the first time in a long time, I felt proud of myself. This was just the beginning, and I was ready for whatever came next. The next day, the air was thick with tension as we gathered for the final challenge. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the dusty path that led to the starting line. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as the announcer's voice echoed through the crowd. "Contestants!" he shouted. "This is the final round. You must move a large wooden block to the finish line 1 kilometre away. The first to cross the line will win the chest of gold. You may choose only 1 tool to help you." I glanced at the block in front of me. It was huge, almost as big as me, and it was going to take everything I had to move it. Around me, others were eyeing the selection of tools laid out before us. There were ropes, levers, wheels, and other heavy equipment, all designed to help us push, pull, or carry the block. But I knew I couldn't rely on strength alone. My muscles weren't as strong as the others, but my mind, that was where I had an advantage. I studied the tools carefully. I watched as one man grabbed a rope, ready to pull the block with all his might. Another contestant picked up a long piece of wood, using it as a lever to lift the block and move it forward. But I didn't feel the need to rush. I knew I had to think this through. After a moment, I made my decision. I picked up a small, sharp knife. The crowd murmured in confusion as I approached the block. A knife! They must have been thinking, but I wasn't going to push the block, I was going to carve it. With careful precision, I began slicing into the wood, shaping the block into a smooth, round ball. The other contestants were already struggling, their muscles straining as they tried to move their massive blocks. Meanwhile, I kept carving, focusing all my energy into making the block lighter and easier to move. An hour later, I had finished. Instead of a heavy, cumbersome block, I had a smooth, round ball. With a smile on my face, I pushed it along the dirt path, gliding easily as the others fought against their weighty burdens. The finish line was in sight, and then I crossed it. First,